Super. Well, I do have some questions prepared, but my idea is to really just kind of get to know David Hoffeld and sort of how you came to some of the insights that you write about. So maybe start here, like Mind Sharp, Shell, Blue Green, the stuff that was happening before your current manifestation.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe take me back to those vintages. What was going on in David Hoffeld, Shell days or Blue Green days?
Yeah. Boy, yeah, that is a question I don't get asked very much. So yeah, going back to that. So I got into sales kind of by accident. I thought it would be a very short time. And so this is many years ago, I graduated with a master's degree, and I basically found a newspaper ad and attracted my attention. I thought it would be more of just a few months I'd be doing that while I kind of looked for what I really wanted to do. But I fell in love with the profession of selling. And I was fortunate to some of those companies that I work for, especially the early ones. I had some great mentors right away that really took me under their wing and really helped me begin to think about selling really as a profession, and really how do I develop my skills. A lot of them challenged me to grow in that. And so during those early years, that's really what I was hyper focused on. And that's one of the things that, looking back on it, really did set me up for success. I would spend an unusual amount of time and enormous amounts of money on self-improvement, even when I didn't have any. Even when I first got into sales. In fact, one of the first things I did was I went to the bookstore and I bought like 5 or 6 books on selling, and I would read them. I still remember my first sales job. During some of the breaks, my colleagues were playing cards and I was reading a sales book. And once in a while I play cards too. I mean, I like to be around people, but I realized, hey, I want to get better at this thing. And I don't know how at this point. I'm just started. And so I started just devouring sales literature. And then I also started, and this is what kind of put me on the trajectory that I'm on right now, is I started leveraging some of the science I had learned in my master's degree to selling. Because as I started reading the books and talking to my managers, I found that they would all contradict one another too. I mean, there was some consistencies, to be sure, but a lot of times they would vary. And it's like, well, who's right? And it felt like trial and error in sales is a really expensive way to figure out what to do. And so I'm like, well, there's got to be some evidence. And I remembered from my master's degree, for my thesis, was in kind of nonverbal communication within the context of persuasive oratory, which means your nonverbal behaviors when they're trying to persuade people. And I'm like, some of that would be relevant here. And I became actually obsessed early in my career with reading scientific journals and applying them to selling. And what I thought would be a way to find some tips to help me be a more effective presenter, actually, as I got deeper and deeper into it over a number of years now, I saw how it influenced every part of the sale. I mean, there was very little that science didn't touch. And I also found that what I was learning there was evidence-backed. And when I applied it, it worked. I mean, it was like my secret weapon. And so my sales grew. I rose to the top of every sales force I was a part of. I got promoted to manager, as you often do when that happens. And I was able to train other people. Yeah. And I had this science that I was, over years now, it took a long time, but over those years, was slowly starting to implement more and more. And then in 2009, I launched my own firm. But my early years, I had a few good mentors, but really it was this insatiable need to learn more about sales and then find evidence-backed approach that drove me to the science and really transformed not only my career, but it transformed my life.
So you just used 3 words that I think your classic salespeople, even the very literate and reading lovers, great readers, sometimes don't quite know really what to make of. Journals, right? Meaning like scientific literature, yes. Science, and evidence-backed, which I'm thinking is one word with a hyphen in the middle, right?
Yes, yes.
But Honestly, like I think it's important. This is one of the things I was thinking when we were through the book is it's important for people to understand what you mean by that word, because science
Yeah.
is like, that's a very big domain, right? So we're talking physics, chemistry, um, huge domains of mathematics, but then you get psychology. But psychology breaks down all these different, sort of subcomponents too. You got like clinical psychology,
Hmm.
neuroscience,
Yes.
etc. So I thought, let's use a bit of time in this conversation just so you can say some of that stuff, which is going to waste a bunch of pages in what should be kind of a page turner, right? You can't riff on that too long, and you can't have a massive footnote. But can you maybe just say a few words about what that word science and its sort of related words actually means for you?
Yeah, that's a really smart question. And thank you for asking that, because I didn't mention that in my earlier response. And that's important. So oftentimes in the world of sales, the word science is very flippantly used. It has been, I've seen literature from the late 1800s that cited the word science. And normally, historically in sales, up until modern times, science is used almost as a catch-all word. And often it means sequential, meaning you do this step, then this step, then this step in the sales process. No evidence for that. It just seems to work. When I use the term, what I'm referring to is peer-reviewed scientific journals that test and look for clear evidence of causality in a behavior producing a certain outcome in a number of specific disciplines. So the disciplines that I specifically look at, that I found are most relevant for selling, are social psychology, cognitive psychology, communication theory, social neuroscience, behavioral economics. Those disciplines have insights that really explain how our brains work. Specifically, how do our brains create the decision to purchase anything? How does influence occur? And when we look at now, there are thousands and thousands and thousands of studies that we can look over. It gives tremendous clarity as far as how things work. And when we say science, what's also important to understand for those who haven't read, which is almost everyone in sales, scientific journals, is there's a lot of collaboration when you look at these journals. In other words, every scientific journal article begins in the same way. It says, here's what we know about this topic. And it cites all the previously documented scientific literature on it, or the most relevant. And then it says, now here's what I'm trying to explore, taking the conversation one step further. And then the journal article will end with, and here's what we still don't know. So it's this collaboration of social scientists and neuroscientists and behavioral scientists over decades that we can now leverage those insights. And boy, when we do, I found that is absolutely transformative. And that's one of the things I try to highlight in my new book, Sell More with Science, and my previous one, The Science of Selling Too, is the science specifically. So we have in the new book, for example, almost 500 different citations to academic scientific journals. So if you're at any time you say, I would like to see that study for myself, or I want to read that research just to see how you came up with that model or that idea, you can do that. So there's tremendous amount of transparency. And I think that really helps you understand the science, helps you understand the why. Why would this work? Why is it a better than perhaps what you're currently doing then, or currently doing right now? And I found that once you understand the why, the how also becomes clearer. Then when I understand, okay, why something works, now applying it, I can do it in this way, or I can modify it and do it over here as well in the sale. It gives me tremendous nimbleness and flexibility. So I think that's been, a lot of the missing piece in selling is we love to tell each other how to do something. Hey, say it like this, or ask this question. But why should we do that? That's often missing. But what the science does, it fills that in. And when I understand the why, now the how becomes far more clear and I can apply it more. But to answer your question directly, when we say science, we mean real scientific journals that you or I could research on our own. Many of them you can find on the internet, and it allows you to really begin, if you want to, you can understand the research and read it for yourself.
some of the studies that you bring in, people know from popular culture, like Duckworth's stuff on grit and the marshmallow test, right? So you know, like you might have picked it up from YouTube, for God's sakes, right? Like they're kind of popular. For those reasons, I think it actually muddies the water too, where people don't know, like, so are those ones kind of lightweight folk psychology science? Like, no, those are hard, granite pieces of research that took a long time by serious people. And it's very tricky in this discipline to sometimes get out the knife and make that serpentine little cut and be like, on the left side of this is serious, hard edge scientific research, and on the right side of this is a bit of folk wisdom that has been repeated many times. But it is tough for people, let's say, who are kind of laity, people who don't have a degree in science or haven't sort of been invited into that community one way or another, to understand which is which.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I think that's one of the things that we really try to do is, number one, when we leverage science, we want to look at research that has been confirmed in many different studies. And you'll see even sometimes the citations in my new book, they're paragraphs long, because I cite so many studies. The publisher said after about 40 some pages of it, they're like, okay, you got to tone it down a little bit, because I want people to see that it isn't like we're building a whole sales curriculum or methodology off one study or some survey that was done, that we're looking for peer-reviewed studies over many, many years that have confirmed the same thing. So it's not just one rogue study. But I think what you raise is also important, and that is making this accessible. And that's what my life work has been so far, is really trying to make this science, take it from a scientific journal, which can be, to be very transparent, and I don't think this is any newsworthy idea, that can be challenging to read. It's an acquired skill for sure, to glean insight, because sometimes they're written in very complicated ways with very complicated math and equations. But to take that complex science and put it into simple models that you can read and implement immediately. So you don't have to feel like you're going back to college or going back to get a master's degree. When you look at this science, we really strive to make it simple and, most importantly, actionable. Because if you can't use it, in the world of selling, it's all about results. And so if you can't use the science, why talk about it at all when it comes to the context of selling? And so we're hyper focused on what is the science that we can understand quickly and apply immediately to help us improve our results and really better serve our potential clients. And for me, that's really what it comes down to, is science is a way that keeps us hyper focused on who the sale should be hyper focused on, which is our buyers. And oftentimes, everything in our sales methodologies is very much seller centric. When you say, well, why do you do this versus that in your activities or behaviors? Usually it's, well, that's how I would want to be sold to, is a common response. Or, well, we're just kind of mimicking how the salesperson next to me sells. He seems to do well, so I copy what he does. But it's so seller centric. Whereas the science, it focuses us on who the sale should always be focused on, which is our buyers. And I think it's that laser focus that a science-backed perspective forces you to always be analyzing, where is my buyer at on their journey? What do they need? What are their desires? What questions can I ask to better serve them in this area or that? It really helps you keep that focus that we all talk about in theory. We all want to be buyer-centric, but in practice, very few methodologies are. When you deconstruct them, it's always based on the seller's preferences, not the buyer's. And that is always a problem.
Yeah. Here's one of my, I want to read you a quote. You might recognize the author. Here is a non-negotiable rule I adhere to and teach to my clients. Whether you win or lose a sale, always know why. And the best way to understand why you get the result you did, and how to improve in the future, is by conducting win-loss analysis.
Yeah.
I focus a lot of my work. So Sage's main sort of reason for existence is we come alongside organizations and help build their academy. the first domain of expertise people usually want their academies is sales. There's a bunch of reasons for that. Sometimes it's leadership, or it could be one or two other things, but it's most often sales. This idea has at the heart of it sort of the original scientific method. I mean, Francis Bacon could have written that, right? You want to know what happened, go back and assess it, and then go back into the field again and do another thing, and then assess that. So I saw sort of those original sort of muscular roots of science in that quotation. And I'll just give you one other thought, and then I want to kind of hear you riff on this. But most of the clients that we serve are sort of sophisticated consulting firms, government advisory firms, law firms, right? So these are not the SaaS, reps who have to go out there and just bash through big lists and things, right? These are folks for whom it's a subtle craft. Those folks need to be doing win-loss analysis. If you're a charity who's looking for grants and you just lose one and then win one, you must be doing win-loss analysis. Say big B2G contracts. Taking the time, making sure you've actually reserved that time, and then having a process for win-loss analysis. So I know that might not have been like the headline section for you in your book, but it really stood out to me, and I wanted to hear you sort of take me into that thought.
Yeah, no, I think it's a good thought, because this really does matter. And this is something that a lot of salespeople either aren't doing, or I found they've tried it and they've given up on it. And so we reintroduced the idea of the win-loss analysis, which isn't a new idea. We kind of frame it in a new way, which I'll unpack. But the win-loss analysis, to your point, is key, because it really, getting back to the basis of the scientific method, we're able to analyze, okay, why is it we're winning? And that is great for collaboration and sharing within the organization. Oftentimes I found in working with companies all around the world that when they start doing a win-loss analysis, that some of the insights they glean on why they're winning can really be helpful in thinking about, how do I strengthen my position in the marketplace? So often we forget about wins, but equally important is when we lose sales, understanding why, because that gives us focus on, okay, how do I now improve? And the problem that I found with win-loss analysis, for those who have tried them and said, okay, and they just give up, it doesn't produce the results, is how are you conducting them? Oftentimes it's just sitting down and thinking about, okay, why do I think I lost that sale? And often people don't know. And so what we introduce in the book is a framework that will help take your win-loss analysis to a whole new place, because it gives accuracy and transparency as to what's really going on in the sale. And what we introduce is what I call the 6 whys, which are simply 6 questions that are anything but simple, because they took me over 6.5 years to develop this model, looking at over 50 years of scientific research on how our brains create buying decisions. But these questions represent the mental steps our brains all go through when forming a buying decision. And they're incredibly useful in a number of ways. Perhaps most impactfully is when you do a win-loss analysis, which we talk about in the book in detail of how to do that. But essentially, you're going to use those 6 whys, which are why change, why now, why your industry solution, why you and your company, why your product or service, or why spend the money. And each of those 6 are major commitments our brains must make, meaning if one of those, and I know I went through them really quickly, but if one of those is not committed to, the sale never occurs, we found, ever. And so what we find is when individuals and organizations collectively look at why they're losing sales, almost always it's because the main reason is 1 or 2 of those whys are not being committed to in the sales process by their potential clients. And that allows them now to get very strategic and say, okay, how do we strengthen our sales process to help inspire a commitment? And so doing the win-loss analysis now is incredibly beneficial. And we've just had clients over the years, which is why I wanted to put this in the book, is they use that win-loss analysis and they're able to make accurate changes to the sales process that really serves their potential clients, identifies a weakness in their sales process, and really helps them align how they sell with how their clients are buying. So it's a tremendous way, not just to increase your sales, but more importantly, to really serve those you're selling to by really helping them through the buying process and identifying where you're not. And that's what those 6 whys do when used in that win-loss analysis.
I had two thoughts when I was reading the 6 whys. Some of those whys are recognized from elsewhere, of course. Yeah, I mean, truth is out there. People find it from a couple of different ways. We've got why change, why now, why your industry and solution, why you/your company, why your product service, why spend the money. To many sales folks in many marketplaces, unless they really take some time, I think they have to go to your first book, not just your second one, in order to differentiate these ones. Why your industry/solution, why your company, why your product service. I think there can be pretty fine gradations between those. In particular, your industry/solution, your product service. Can you just like, I don't know if that's putting you too much on the spot, but can you sort of draw the fence line between those three so that people who look at that will be like, okay, that's actually 6 totally distinct and unique whys?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So why your industry solution deals specifically with a client saying, why do I need you or any of your primary competitors? And often what they default to is, why can't I do this myself? Maybe it's not as good, but it'll be probably a lot less expensive, and maybe it'll be good enough. And why don't I just try that? And if it doesn't work out, then I can always reach out to you and we can pick up the conversation. And I call this kind of the silent sales assassin, because many salespeople never see it coming. In fact, they think of competitors as organizations or individuals very similar to them who offer a similar product or service. And really, it causes us to expand our definition of a competitor to anything that can take away business from you. And that includes your client doing it themselves. So why your industry solution essentially addresses, why can't your client create a good enough solution on their own? Because if that's even a remote possibility, they're often considering it and will often go to that as a first step to test the waters. So addressing that is mission critical. Why can't they do this on their own? Why your product or service then differentiates you from other competing options, other products or services that are similar. And especially in today's environment, there is so much product and service parity. Oftentimes, focusing on that differentiation is key, because if we don't focus on differentiation, what the research shows is we're often judged on price. And they go, well, they all sound kind of the same. I'm just going to go with whatever one is the cheapest, because how else am I going to make this decision? So why your product or service is where you say, okay, here's what my product or service, as opposed to all other alternatives, here's how the value we can provide. And here's why we are the right solution for you. So it's hyper-focused on your product or service, whereas why your industry solution is more focused on, why do you need anyone to help you with this? Why can't you just do it on your own? Because again, this is one that salespeople often don't focus on enough, and it costs them a lot of sales, and they're not aware of it. It's just not on their radar. And oftentimes their clients won't tell them this, but they'll just default to doing it themselves, because even though it might not be the right thing for them, they don't know that because no one's ever told them. Because salespeople are so much trying to focus on themselves and, hey, here's how I'm great. They never really help the client think through, why can't I just do this on my own, or at least try? Why isn't that a good first step?
Very useful. I think there will be some folks that you see this a little bit in the world of startups, where they're kind of in a category of one. So when somebody's evaluating their quote unquote industry, they're sort of evaluating that organization. So separating those out is useful. In one case, it's like, why do I need a lawyer at all? In the other case, it's like, why do I need Raja and Tan in specific?
Right.
Yeah. And then maybe down from there, like, why do I need you know, Bill Smith, the particular partner, to handle this, you know, suit or case.
Yeah,
Okay.
it gets from general to very specific, but it's that, yeah, it's those 6 whys are, as I mentioned, those are kind of those mental steps that if we don't get commitments to any one of those 6, the sale will break down and it just doesn't occur, because that's kind of the, I think of them as almost the building blocks of the sale. So how is a buying decision created? Through commitments to those 6 whys. And if I get those commitments, the sale almost always occurs. If I'm talking to an individual or group of buyers who has the authority and means to purchase, then the sale is almost inevitable. But if one of those isn't committed to, even if all the other ones are, the sale will break down and it results in an objection. And that's why those win-loss analysis are so useful, is which of those whys are costing you the most sales. And you go, okay, if I address whatever one that is, now you ask another question: how do I strengthen my sales process to more effectively answer and engage clients around that why and get a commitment? And it's a powerful way to align selling with buying.
So here's one of the questions I have for you, because it's something that I've seen. When I saw the 6 whys, I was like, got it, got it, got it. They seem very intuitive to me, but I've, you know, hung around this territory a while. You could see straight away a smarty pants salesperson going, oh, don't worry, I can answer all of those. But that's not the job. The job is not for them to answer all of those. The job is them to answer how the client will answer all of those, right? I mean, I think that's, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but that's correct, isn't it?
Yeah. So the commitment isn't from the salesperson, the commitment's from the client. And what you bring up is what I mentioned earlier, the seller centric approach. It's so pervasive in all of us because it's ingrained in so much of the training we've all received. I know that I received early on in my career, that we have to kind of say, okay, the 6 whys are for them. I mean, if you commit to them, I'm not sure what that means, since you're not the one buying, right? It's the buyers that have to commit to them because they're the ones making the buying decision. So it's more than just addressing them. It's, am I addressing them in an effective enough way that inspires a commitment from my buyers? In other words, am I helping them form a buying decision, or am I not? And that's a hard question to answer without science, because then you're guessing. You're like, well, it's hard to help someone make a buying decision when I don't know how that occurs. And that's where we're at right now in the world of selling. We talk a lot about, we want to help people buy. How do you do that? I don't know. Yeah, you make a friend. I don't know. People don't know what the science tells us. Well, one of the things they want to do is focus on those 6 whys. If I can inspire commitment to them, that also helps them buy. And what's also important is for those, when you're working with a client over a period of time, or potential clients, what should you focus on your next sales call with them? Well, what haven't you gotten a commitment to yet? So it allows you to be very proactive and strategic on, when I meet with them next week, what do I want to focus on? Okay, well, where are they at in that journey through the 6 whys? Which haven't they committed to yet? And that's where I want to focus, because that's what they need to really complete the buying decision. So again, it gives you this transparency and this alignment that without it is hard to come by, and extremely hard to come by. So the science just helps us so much, which is why I'm so passionate about it.
So when you train this, because a big part of your practice, I understand, David, is training your clients on how to understand these tools and use them.
Yes.
I'm certain you must see this dynamic between a manager and, say, a frontline rep, where it's like, let's pick off a couple of whys. Why now? And the rep could say, they could come up with any answer, but the question isn't, why do you think now? They must have to justify it as like, I believe that the client thinks now because, and then they must have to sort of evince some piece of hard proof of some kind, like the client said this, or they sent me that, or something. Am I not right? Because otherwise it's just a game of cat and mouse, where the manager is going to be asking them 6 whys, and the clever rep's going to be like, I don't know, here's a perfectly good reason why. Here's another perfectly good plausible reason why.
Yeah, that's a great question. So so for that win-loss analysis with the 6 whys, or like why now as an example, what we want to look for is evidence that the client has committed to this. So what have they said regarding, have we addressed it with them? Have we talked about why moving forward now is advantageous and, said things like, does that make sense? And they go, yeah, sure. Okay, well, I don't know what that means. I still don't know what the client's thinking. Whereas we want to get more specific. We want to ask questions that really help them think through it. So based on our conversation so far, Kevin, what do you see maybe some of the advantages would be of moving forward now? Well, and I want to I'm not sure if there are any, or you might say, well, based on our conversation, I do think that I want to have that. So can I guide them into a commitment? Can I guide them if they say, yeah, I think it makes sense based on what you shared, and they think it through and they respond? Then can I even go in and say, so it sounds like then this is something that your organization is definitely focused on moving forward within the next few months. Am I understanding that correctly? Absolutely. Okay, now I know, right? So
Yes.
that's a verbal response to that why now. What most salespeople do, the mistake is they present and don't ever ask any kind of those assessment questions to really understand what the client thinks about it. So they'll present a little PowerPoint on why moving forward now is great. And then they'll say, does that make sense? Yeah, it makes sense. Any questions on that? No, not at all. Great. They must agree with me. And then they move right on when that's not often the case. So we want to engage our client regarding these. So when you're presenting about them, ask them those assessment questions, which we also talk about in the book, because it's such an impactful way to really know, do they perceive the value that I'm sharing? And the questions also help them think through the value that you're sharing as well. It forces them to elaborate on them and then verbally respond. And that gives you transparency. Do they understand? Do they not? Do I need to clarify? Do I need to reframe something? Are they embracing kind of the ideas I've shared? If there's a concern, what is it? So I can kind of help them through this process. But oftentimes in sales, we don't ask those kind of questions. And so we don't know. So when our manager says, have you gotten a commitment to why now? They say, I guess. I mean, they haven't said they're not going to do it now. So I guess so. But that's not the same. So ignorance isn't a commitment. And we want to get that commitment and focus on it. And so it's incredibly useful if you're a manager, to ask, okay, why do you think that? If you get has the client committed to why now? I think so. Well, why do you believe that? Like, what have they said? And to see if they can say anything specific. I found when coaching, if people can't say anything specific, then there's usually not much to say, right? And so when you ask for specific answers, you get to the truth real quickly. So that's how I would do a win-loss analysis around why now is, okay, what has the client said regarding this? And if we haven't addressed it yet, boy, that's something we might want to do on our next call, because this is important to them. I mean, it's not just for our perspective, it's useful for the sale, but even more importantly, shouldn't a client think through when they're going to make a purchase like this, if this purchase matters? And shouldn't we be involved in giving insight and helping them think about this rightly, so in ways that are in their best interest? And so it's a way to really serve through how you sell and provide value through the sales process. And so that's why these 6 whys are very impactful when we address them directly. So using those assessment questions, which we also have when we talk about the 6 whys in the Sell More of a Science book, we have the second half of that chapter is those assessment questions, and they really go hand in hand on ways you can set up and begin to inspire those commitments.
Just as you were speaking about this, it occurred to me that Karl Popper's kind of big scientific contribution of falsificationism, right? It's like, we don't run around looking for every random token of something. We really value the things that we can disprove. And there's sort of a pattern there where when you see mature, experienced sales, maybe managers or just salespeople themselves, they love disqualifying opportunities, or basically using a 6 whys, not to say, how can I get these all cleared up, cleaned up, answered, and checked off the list, but rather, is there any stone I haven't unturned here? Is there another way that this deal is actually no good and I haven't seen that yet? Have I really asked the client straight face to face, why don't you just do nothing? Is doing nothing an option for you? Anyway, I think that's actually in the same spirit as Popper. And when you talk about the 6 whys, it's the same sort of spiritual mood of saying, I'm not looking for random ways that I might barely be able to qualify this. I'm looking for, does anything fall off of this when I shake it? You know, has it got like, has it got rigor, or are we missing something?
It's a great point. Yeah, a good example of that would be like, why change? I mean, if you can't identify a compelling case for them to change, maybe they shouldn't. And maybe you're not the right solution. And I think that's something too we talk about later on in the book when it comes to sales ethics, is that I think there's part of the disqualification is maybe I'm not the right solution for them. Maybe this isn't really what they need. Maybe they might have thought I could be, but as I'm uncovering this, I'm not seeing a clear reason why they need to change. And so now the ethical thing is for me to disqualify myself rather than, which is good for the client, builds a lot of trust. They'll probably come back to you later on, but also you're not investing a lot of time with an organization or individual that you can't truly help. And that allows you to focus on more of your sweet spot, which is a better investment of your time. So absolutely. So if you struggling to find, assuming you're competent, like for example, why change, which is often the foundational why. Until I create the curiosity for change, it's hard for much to happen beyond that. But if I'm struggling with that with a particular client, maybe that's a good indicator that they shouldn't be looking at me, at least not right now, and to let them know that and to disqualify myself. I think there's a lot of wisdom in that. And it really keeps you ethically aligned with your client, and that I'm not trying to sell someone something, I'm trying to serve people. And when you have that mindset, it's not about how much I sell to people, whether they need it or not, because that's not ethical. It's how do I really serve those people? So who is my ideal client? Who can I really help? And what circumstances am I not a good fit for? And identifying that, so when I see it, I can react appropriately. That also gives you longevity in your career, because I found that when people behave even in somewhat unethical ways where they're just trying to sell, period, they're just trying to hit a quota, they're not focused on the buyer, that burns you out. That's not rewarding, and that's not what any of us really want to do with our lives and careers. I mean, money's great, but there's some things I believe you should never sell, and one of them is your integrity. That should never be for sale. And so I think in disqualification, it also means being honest and saying sometimes, we're not a good fit, at least not right now, based on our conversation. And I think when you do that, people are usually surprised. And if they ever find that you are a good fit down the road, you're the one they call. And there's really little competition, because they're like, I remember this guy 3 years ago I talked with said that he wasn't a good fit for me. That's the guy I want to call up, because I can trust that person. Why? Because he's really looking out for me, not just trying to hit a quota, just trying to cram a sale down my throat. And I think, boy, that pays off in the long term. And it really helps you ensure that you sell in a way that you can be proud of, and that'll give you longevity in your career.
David, I see another book title in your future. Maybe tying some, because there's some interesting science around this too, right? Whether it's game theory or evolutionary ethics, or some other innovations in ethics that have happened sort of. And ethics has primarily been part of my school. I'm a philosopher by training, not a scientist. So that's usually been our folks' domain, but the scientists have been mucking around with it and making certain inroads. So maybe the science of sales ethics is, a title you might be uniquely positioned to draft.
Yeah, I cover it. It's a fascinating topic that isn't addressed very much in sales beyond like a Boy Scout manual, don't lie, cheat, or steal, which is useful, but not helpful enough when it comes to sales, because we need a little more nuanced and deeper understanding of it for what we do. But I deal with it in the last chapter, just because, interestingly enough, I think I mentioned this in the book, I get asked this question all the time. People will often, and I found I'm one of the few that I've talked with sales trainers that get asked this all the time. And it's not because I'm not ethical. It's because people say, you're talking about all this science. Could this be misused? Because people recognize when you talk about it that some of this stuff is quite powerful. Yeah. And what does it mean to use it rightly? And so I get asked this. So I thought, you know what, I should write about this a little bit because it's an important question, and I love the thought process that's inspiring it. How do we really help people and not misuse it? And so in the book, we talk about a little bit of the difference between influence and manipulation. And there's also some really interesting science on when are salespeople specifically more likely to give into a temptation when good people do bad things.
Yeah.
When are they more likely to do that? In what circumstances? So if I'm a sales manager or even a salesperson, I can say, okay, when I'm in that situation, I want to be extra cautious because that is the time in my career when I'm most likely to do it. And so I put that in the chapter just because at least in the sales conversation, I haven't seen a lot of good, serious dialogues about sales ethics. And I get it a lot because I'm using science. Maybe it's not as needed with more of a traditional approach. But for us, because we're talking about some powerful ideas, I think it's important to think through, okay, what is influence? What is manipulation? And to really understand that so we can commit to and proactively set up safeguards to make sure that we're behaving in ways that are consistent with how we really want to serve people and treat people and set everyone up for success. So I think it's a really important topic. I'm thinking of ideas for maybe a third book. So we'll see. We'll see.
What are your ideas? Give us a little angle in on. I mean, I'm sure you have several titles you could work on. What would be third?
Yeah, a couple ideas. One would be something we've done a lot of work in recently, over the last 5 years or so, and we've developed a really interesting curriculum around is sales coaching from a sales leadership perspective, a really science-backed way that's very different than what's normally thought of as sales coaching, but we found it really helps people get better much faster, and it's a whole different way of doing coaching. That's one idea. A second one that I'm batting around is around the idea of influence, but more of influencing yourself. And what does that mean? I think that's a big topic, especially right now. There's a lot of discontentment around the world with people want to either change jobs or improve their lives in some areas, or they just feel stagnant for a variety of reasons. And so the idea of, in my books, we talk a lot about influencing others. Yes. And there is some on influencing yourself as well with mindsets and grit and things like that. But I think the one person that I can influence more than any other one by far is me. And we're all that way. We have more control over ourselves, but often we don't think about influence when it comes to us. And so that's an idea I've been batting around. I've been in writing this book took years, and now I'm talking about it, trying to get the word out there. It was just recently released. So I'm not ready to write a third book yet, but those are the two ideas I've been batting around. So we'll see.
Very cool. Well, if you want a good sparring ring, and you want to stick on some, headgear and pads and just knock them around, you're welcome back for a conversation on either of those. If that turns to be a fruitful venue to evolve the ideas.
I appreciate that. I might take you up on that, actually.
Yeah, great. Maybe if I can, I'll put one thought in your head around sales ethics, because I think about it a lot. Not from a science perspective. I come from the other school, as I said. There's some derivative of the golden rule that's extremely instructive, which is to say, if your clients could come in and sit in on the sales training that your sales team receives, how would they feel? It's not do unto others as you would have them do unto you. It's like teach your sales firm the way that you would have your clients be happy that you are teaching your sales firm.
Yeah.
So you can very quickly see, let's just take an easy course, right? Negotiations. If you teach them sort of how to get to yes, for example, is a classic. It's like that framework, any client would be like, yes, cool. You want to negotiate with me in this way? Totally fine, right? And more power to you, because it's the absolute bedrock of win-win negotiations. They'll be like, fine, that's great. Then there's this other garbage book called 99 Sales Strategies. It's basically just like skullduggery, cloak and dagger, like dirty tricks manual. It's like this: if a client got a whiff that you were teaching your salespeople these techniques, that'd be it. And it's not it's not a scalpel as a way to sort of define the rule, but it's a pretty sharp blade to basically
Mhm.
say anything you would be embarrassed for a client to overhear as your sales training is pretty much draws the line. Even with, for me, even with very powerful tools, which could be used for good or for ill,
Yeah.
any client in their right mind could sit in on that and be like, that's fine. Now it depends how these suckers use what they've just been given, but there's nothing objectively wrong about this or offensive about it. But instinctively if you're teaching dirty tricks because you'd be embarrassed for the client to listen in.
Yes. Yeah. I love that. I think that's great.
Hmm.
I completely agree. And I think that's one of the things that early in my research, I don't think I talk about this in the book. I might have in the first one. That one of the things when I was testing out some of using this science, so this is many, many, many years ago. And one of the things I was most pleased with was, yes, it improved results, which wasn't a surprise. But what I really, really was pleased with more than anything was how favorably clients responded to the strategies
Hmm.
because they got value out of it. And I think that's such a key is so often in selling, we do fall into a manipulative mindset where it's all about me and we focus so much on ourselves that we forget about the client. It's almost as if we're using them to accomplish a goal. They're a necessary evil. They're someone I have to go through to get my objective, which is the sale. And that's such a counterproductive perspective because it sets us up to treat them in ways that are not advantageous to them or even us. And it doesn't foster long-term relationships. And I don't think it's the kind of person most people want to be. I don't think
Hmm.
that it's not who we want to be. It's not who we want to me around our children. I'll give you an example of this. I do mention this in the book, but I think it's a good illustration of something seemingly innocent that can begin to cross the line. Because what the research shows is when it comes to ethics, it's usually not someone goes from a model salesperson or a citizen or a leader to, ultra corrupt. It's steps. And one gentleman I remember coaching years and years ago, I put this in the book, was mimicking the salesperson who was in the office next to him. He was underperforming. This salesperson in the office next to him was a high achiever, and he had a Southern accent, and this gentleman didn't. And so he started using a Southern accent when he sold. And he told me about this. He said, I've started a new sales strategy. And I said, what's that? And he says, I'm using a Southern accent now. And I'm like, you're what? And he said, yeah, the guy next to me, he has a Southern accent. Now, he actually had one. He was from the South, Southern part of the United States. And so he said, I'm been using it as well. And we talked about it. And I talked about, that wasn't why he was effective. His accent had nothing to do with it. He was a good salesperson. But B, about authenticity. I mean, part of integrity is being honest, being forthright. I said, and this is the analogy I gave him. I said, imagine you met one of your clients at the grocery store. You're walking down the aisle and they come down the other aisle. They recognize you, you recognize them. And let's say you're with your family. Are you going to start talking in a Southern accent? Are you not? Like, what are you going to do? I mean, you see the ridiculous situation you're now in
Yeah,
because of a little dishonesty, right?
yeah.
Now, if you talk in a Southern accent, what are you going to say to your wife and kids? Like, sorry about that guy. Like, what happened to dad? Like, what's going on? Why is he talking? Or if you don't, what's the client going to say? Like, where's your accent? Right? It just, when you play silly games, you win silly prizes. And so sometimes little steps, and that's how it starts. And so it's being very leery of, and that's what the research shows as well. When someone is ethical in their personal life, they're more likely to be ethical when they sell. If someone is unethical in their personal life, there's some really interesting research on this. They're more likely to give in temptation and be unethical in business in general. So we got to think holistically about ethics. It's not that I can do whatever I want over here and be ethical when I, sell to someone. It's be ethical, right? Be authentic, be you, be honest. And I think just making some of those commitments will help you steer clear of a lot of those, silly pitfalls people get into that seem relatively innocent enough. I mean, is an accent really going to do that much damage? Yes and no, but it will often lead into, that's the precursor of bad things to come. And it does certainly compromise your integrity, as the question I asked him about his wife and kids and the client in the same aisle in the grocery store kind of manifest. It's like, well, what do you do in that situation? You look silly to somebody, and
Yeah.
you're losing your credibility either with your family or the client. Someone's going to lose, and you're one of those people. So it's, now, being ethical is always in everyone's best interest, even if it's hard sometimes, even if it costs you sales. It's always worth it in the long run.
Okay, there's a bonus question after. I mean, I really want people to just pick up your books and read them, so, and find you, and engage. It's Hoffeld Group, is it?
Hoffeldgroup.com. Yep, is our
So,
website.
I'll tell you what the bonus question is, and then I'll let you give everybody your details. I really want to know sort of which chapter never made it, or which big idea you think just is awesome to you, but the readership never really picks up on it as the big main idea, something that's kind of more just in the notes file.
That's a great question.
But while you kind of percolate on that, yeah, just let people know, like, where should they find you? What are you open for? How do they pick up your books? Yeah, maybe just
Okay.
give everybody some directions.
Yeah, so you can find me at Hoffeld, Hoffeld group.com. There's a lot of great resources on our website as well. You can learn about science-based selling. We also have a podcast that comes out every week. It's called The Science of Selling. You can find it anywhere that you consume podcasts. And the books, The Science of Selling, and my newest, Sell More with Science, are available anywhere fine books are sold. They're all over the world right now, so you can check those out. To answer your question, what didn't make it? I'll share with you from both books real quickly.
Yeah.
In The Science of Selling, one thing I wanted to put in was a chapter on reframing, and I wasn't done the research on it. It took about 3.5 years to develop the reframing model, and I wasn't quite done with the research when The Science of Selling came out. And so that was what didn't make it in that book. But I did put that in Sell More with Science. That's chapter 5 in that book. In Sell More with Science, I think one big thing that is easy to miss is at the very end of the book. It's probably my favorite chapter in the whole book. It's the last chapter, and it talks about how do you change your career for the better. And it gives a formula, if you will, for how do I, when I want to make radical changes in my career, and you could also apply this to anything in your life as well, how do I do it? And we talk about almost a step-by-step way you can do it. I think it's a really powerful chapter. It's kind of the last chapter of the book, and it's easy to miss, but I think it's something people definitely want to check out, because if you want to go to the next level, that will show you what does science say is a way to do it, and it'll walk you through that and applying it for yourselves in a number of exercises. So that's something I think it'd be easy to miss because it's at the very end, but it's a chapter that I think is very, very powerful.
I'm looking at the table of contents on Audible here. Is this 5 ways you can supercharge your sales with science, or is it take your sales career to the next level?
Take your sales career to the next level, chapter 9. Yes.
Yeah. 28 minutes and 6 seconds of firepower. Okay, yeah. Great. Well, I consume a lot of this stuff on Audible, so people can grab it there, right? Very recently released, right?
Yeah, just released last week, so very, very recently.
Awesome.
So yeah, it's on Audible. It's in electronic form if that's how you consume books, or there's the hardcover as well.
Great. Well, super. What an awesome conversation. I'm so glad we made time. Thank you for taking time. I know time's a precious resource for you, given your training, writing, teaching pace, so researching pace too. So thanks for that, David. And
oh, my pleasure. Thank you for having me on. I've enjoyed our conversation. Some great questions you asked.
Well, great. Me too. Let's speak again soon.